All right, we're back. We are COMP125 in the summer 2018 semester. That's client-side web development at Centennial. And we're week 13. We have this week and next week, and then we're done the semester. Wow, the semester's really flown. So this week we're talking about Express. Last week we went into an intro into Node. It was really an intro, the stuff I talked about. We didn't go into a lot of detail. We did talk about a couple of built-in modules or that are part of the Node.js bundle. Who remembers what those modules are? We talked about three of them. Three modules that that are part of Node.js that we included or required last week. Yes. No. Modules that we use. Which one? HTTP. Which one? File system module and one more. Come on. And the path module. The path module, right? So those three things we used last week. And this week we're going to make a new folder, but I'm going to let the generator do it for me. So let's hold off for a bit. I've got a PowerPoint that I want to take a look at really quickly for this to support the stuff we're talking about. So I'm going to just kind of go in there and look at it briefly, only because I want to kind of make sure you have all the information you need. So it's this week 13 PowerPoint that I put up on eCentennial, right? So last week we talked about Node, and again, I was using this reference to this book, Mean Web Development, which is a really good book, I thought, for just an overall, kind of view on the whole mean stack with Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node. Notice the Express, that's the part we're doing today. We did Node. The only two pieces you're missing is Mongo and Angular, and we can't cover that in this course. There's just no time. But really, it's about building Express and where Express came from. So I want you to think about Express layered on top of Node. That's what it is. So again, we have Node as a base way of accessing server-side files with JavaScript, right? That's what we're using. So JavaScript-enabled backend engine. That's what it does. And again, it's based off of Google's V8 engine. We talked about that last week as well. And then we layer Express on top. But Express didn't come from nowhere. Express came from another, group of modules that they originally came out with called Connect, right? So Connect was first. Actually, it's talked about in your first PowerPoint from last week. If you actually read the PowerPoint, there's a section on Connect, I believe. And they talk about how Express grew out of Connect. They kind of came up with a set of modules as an example that kind of do a few things. One, so Node has some basic things, but there were some things that developers were using all the time. And one of the things that developers were always using was routing. They kind of did a lot of routing. A lot of that switching, like, remember the switch statement we put together last week? It's kind of the same thing, but they did that all the time. And they're like, well, we got to have a better, more efficient system for this. So they created a module for that, right? Connect. So it does routing. That's what Express does. It also does other things. It does view management, right? So that's something that's not built into Node, right? View management and routing, is kind of the two things that enable you to create almost like an API. You can use it for a RESTful API. You can also do it as, an Express-based website. And there's a lot of other, as you'll see, some frameworks that are based off of Express. And then there's the whole solution stack. It became so popular that they created the solution stack, the mean stack, or MERN. But there's always Express in there, right? Because Express is used for backend routing, right? And it's combined with Node. It's kind of the perfect complement. So even though the word Node is in there, we use Node, but mostly we use the Express modules that are something we have to import. Okay, so up until now we haven't really had to import much, right? Because Node, we've used the built-in modules from Node. Today we're going to actually do some importing, or we're going to show you importing. I'm not actually do it because we have no time, and it's part of your thing, part of your assignment number 4. So again, let's think about Express. It is a framework. It extends Connect. That's what it does. So there's another module called Connect, and that's for you to look up. But basically, it takes these request response objects that we get, and it allows us to do more advanced routing. Okay. So also, one more thing that Express allowed us to do is finally use something called the MVC pattern, which we've talked about before. Okay. So typically, I'm just going to skip down here. We install Express like this, npm install Express. It's just a module. if I was going to do it by myself, like just by itself. And then what we would do is inside of the dependencies, inside of our package.json file, which we've seen before, it would be listed there. Now you can see that this is an older version of Express. I kind of did this last winter, or this winter just passed. So 4.8.8 was the version. I'm sure that the version of Express is probably not 4.8.8 anymore. Again, so we install Express, and then we have this syntax as opposed to the one we would start off with Node. So notice that there is a shortened syntax for some of the stuff we've been able to do. So here's something. We say, well, Express is equal to, we require Express. And when we do this kind of thing, what we're really saying is that the Express object now, it represents the entire Express module. Okay, so think about this module with a lot of functionality. Okay, and now the keyword Express, if we did a var or a let, if we would do a let, this is, like I said, this is coming from a different time, right? We didn't do ES6 with Node, wasn't as so much ES6 prevalent as it is today. And then we say this is interesting. We say that app is equal to the Express object. So it's almost like we create Express as a reference to the whole Express package, and then we use this app to represent a shortcut to the Express object. And the reason why we do that is because we're going to use app later on, and sometimes we use Express by itself as well. Okay, so when we say app.use, this app.use basically says, hey, whenever this is the pathing, this is the routing, how routing looks in Express, right? Which is a lot different than using a switch statement. Things, hey, when you get the slash, which means if I go to the website and I don't put any index.html or about.html or something else, right? Then I want you to do something else. This is what I want you to do. This is the callback function related to that going there, right? So instead of maybe doing a switch to say go to slash, and I can have many of these. I can have app use slash home.html, app use slash about.html, app use slash whatever, right? And I can create my routing table this way, okay? Which we're going to see. And then I can say app.listen, because once I have app also represents the server. I don't have to actually explicitly say server.create anymore, right? App is an instance of a server. And when I say listen, it activates or instantiates an instance of the server that I can listen to at a particular port. Okay, so it's a shortened version. So that's another thing that Express did for us. It hid a lot of the nitty-gritty details of how the server creation would work on the back end for Node, right? So again, a shorthand. Now you might say, well, Tom, you've told us that shorthands are bad, because then you don't understand what's happening in the back end. Well, you've kind of seen that already last week. This week we're going to work with something that makes us a little bit more viable. I'm okay with using shortcuts. And a good example of that is TypeScript. TypeScript gives us a really cool shortened version in some ways, and code hinting, a lot of support for doing things that would take us a lot longer by ourselves, right? And a lot more difficult syntax. TypeScript is a cleaner syntax. So too does Express in some ways. Notice that the module pattern on the bottom here, where it says module.exports is equal to app. So I can have a module that is the server module, right? As an example, this would be server.js. And then I can export app as the module, the server module. And I can import app into another file if I really want to. Okay, so that's really how you do Express. It's really, like I said, a shortened syntax. We're going to look at the Express website. I still use res send, response send, and all that kind of stuff. And the content type header that we normally would do in Node is hidden from us. We don't care about that anymore. Express takes care of it all, right? It kind of determines what file it's reading, and then it spits out the proper content type, which is kind of cool. So we don't have to do that whole content switching stuff. It'll read everything, right? So that's really kind of in a nutshell how Express works. This goes into a lot more detail about the app request and response objects, which we've got before, and it gives us some examples of the API documentation that's built into Express. So for example, we can set environment variables. We can do that. App get, which actually allows us to create almost like to get the environment variables. App get, app set, right? App engine, which tells us the kind of view engine we want to use, all right? So if I want to use EJS, which is the default engine that I recommend, right? Then what we can do is, remember, EJS is just a way of viewing. We're going to learn EJS today and tomorrow, right? Because we need to do that. And it's a built-in view engine, and Express supports many different view engines, not just EJS, but also something called Pug, or it used to be called Jade, and a bunch of other view engines as well. And a view engine is how the views, remember we had the views folder and we have partials, and inside we also have maybe a contents folder. So how the views are loaded with Express, it manipulates the views kind of like the way we did it with Ajax, but a little bit more efficiently. And you can choose the syntax, or the almost like a micro language that we can use with the views, a shorthand language that can build out the views dynamically for us. So dynamically creating the pages, just like we did with Ajax, where we inject different parts of the view inside of our pages, Express can take care of that on the back end, not on the front end. So this is back end routing and switching, right? As opposed to front end routing and switching. And this is why it's really good to learn this together, right? So whatever it is, it's app.verb, and whatever the verb is. App.use is obviously for, kind of connects with the HTTP server and creates this switching stuff happening, right? We can also see app root, and whatever the verb is. And you can also do both a get and post type request. And we'll go into that in a little more detail. Now, if you read this, it goes into a lot more detail about the kind of request and response objects. One I want to handle right now is the request object. So the request object in Express, it's different than the request object in Node by itself. It also includes a params property, which actually is able to allow us to parse the parameters that are inside of our URL. Okay, so if I put in some things in the URL, it'll actually be able to parse the stuff that's in the URL and determine a different route for us. And also body, the body of the request object can also contain a lot of information if we're getting, because the body comes from sometimes a post request. So for example, if I'm doing a contact page and I press the submit button, the body object is going to contain all the variable details, the variable values that are coming from the form data, right? That's where it's stored in there. And we use something called body parser, which is another object we're going to download and use. And body parser allows us to parse the body of the request object a little better, right? So we're going to be talking about that. Okay, so that's the request object. And there's some other information here about cookies and so on. You can use cookie parser to parse the cookies on your browser and so on. The response object is also something that we can set. We can get the status code, 200, 304, 500, and so on, that we did before from the response object, right? We can also set the response header in the from a HTTP perspective, and so on. We can also redirect. If I want to redirect my page to somewhere else, I can use a response.redirect, res.redirect, to redirect ourselves to a different page, okay, based on the status that we're going to use, which is optional. See the square brackets? Always means optional. And the URL we want to go to. So if I want to, let's say, whenever I go to this page, I want to redirect somewhere else, I can do that with the res redirect, okay? By the way, all this information is also located on the express.js website, which we're going to look at in a second. Res.json, instead of responding with res.send, which actually responds sometimes with the HTML, or the content type is more of HTML type, or CSS or JavaScript, res.json converts the response object's data into JSON format. And this is the way we would create a backend API, a RESTful API, that spits out JSON data that we can consume with a front end like Angular or React or something else. Or even what you're going to be doing next semester with .NET, right? So you can have a .NET backend, that contacts, kind of this, this API that we've created, and it can connect to it. We can also have a front end that can consume it, any kind of front end, Angular, React, Vue, whatever, and it'll just use that JSON data to kind of fill in the information that you're going to kind of post to the user. So response object, is used a little bit differently with Express. And so what's happened is Express builds on the response and request objects that come from Node. So it extends them, all right, which is kind of cool. And that's why Express is so popular, because it makes it a lot easier. Some other popular modules that are bundled with Express, Morgan, which is a request logger. So Whenever we use Morgan, we can log all of our HTTP requests that come into the system. Morgan logs them all. That's really cool because that means if I get a request for a specific URL that breaks our website, I'll know, right? I also know which ones are the most popular requests that I'm getting, right? So Morgan does that for us. Body parser we talked about already. And there's others that we're going to see. Compression actually compresses our objects. Express static is a way of serving out static files. Sometimes we need to do that, right? Cookie parser parses the cookies that come from our, the ones from a session storage or web storage. And the session object. Session object, again, is part of the persistent storage we use with sessions, especially when it comes to logging in and user identification and all that kind of stuff. We use sessions. So these are popular things we're going to see bundled with Express or used alongside with Express. Okay. And of course, like I said, it allows us to implement the MVC design pattern. MVC design pattern, model, view, and controller. And I think that's covered probably somewhere else. I'm not going to go to application structure because we're going to use a slightly different structure. But I'm wondering if the MVC design pattern is here or in the previous. It might be in the previous PowerPoint. Let me see if I'm wrong. Nope, it's here. So when we render views, right? When it comes to rendering views, I mean, again, I'm skipping forward a little bit. I'll skip back to that other stuff. What we do is we have this, again, this is a design pattern. Even though they're called model, controller, and view, guys and girls, it's just a name, a convention that we use to identify different parts of our application, okay? And again, the MVC pattern is not specific to JavaScript. It's not specific to any programming language. You can use it. It's just a pattern, a way of expressing or kind of dividing up responsibilities. And so we have this division of concerns. Is what we talk about, right? We have different kinds of concerns, right? And this splitting of concerns, this MVC pattern, allows us to kind of give our view development to designers, right? Say, hey, designer, you design these views. It's nothing to do with me. I'm the back-end dude. I take care of the controller or the model. And you can actually split it even further. You can have programmers that create the logic, that connect to the model, and that display the view, the logic that connects to the view, right? So these three pieces, a separation of concerns, allows us to separate our work and give different, work to different people as well. And also really separate, those parts so we can actually focus on them more. And sometimes they're also separated in a logical folder format, right? We have a model folder. We might have a controllers folder, even a views folder. And you'll see that more in COMP125 when you take it next semester, okay? Where they really do that separation of concerns. And it actually is very explicit. So this idea of rendering the view. So what happens is we want to use this idea of render, res.render or app.render, right? Depending on where you start using Express. We're going to use res.render a lot of times. Depending on the view manager we're going to be using, and we're going to be using EJS, right? What's going to happen is we're going to render a particular view based on the routing request that's made by the user. So for example, if the user goes to about.html, we're going to render the about view, right? The view that's inside the about folder, right? Or inside the content folder. And we're going to go into that in a second. I'll give you some examples of that. Again, take a look at all these dependencies. This is something that we're going to kind of see. EJS, again, is the Express JavaScript. That's what it starts, it talks about. It's a specific, smaller version of JavaScript that's only for Express. And so we're going to see JavaScript inside the views as well, and a way of bringing in these variables inside of, or injecting variables inside of our pages, right, from the back end. Similar to what PHP does, by the way. So here's an example of what it might look like when we use the Express generator. All right, I wanted to show you this really briefly before we actually get to brass tacks. But if you look at it, you can see that Express, here we use one var statement. I'm not sure I would ever do this, but you can see that it requires a bunch of modules. So these are the modules that are required. And inside of our server, we can determine if our environment is a development environment or a production environment, which we can set. These are our environment variables, just like our process.env.port. That was one environment variable we talked about last week, which we can set the port based on the provider. Our provider last week was Heroku, and Heroku allowed us, by the way, it didn't work with Azure, but we're going to use, you can see that Express there's a higher chance that Express is going to work with Azure because it's a little bit higher level than Node, and it requires different things than Node didn't provide. We had to do some other things. Notice that it says that, so we load all this stuff, and then we have this area down here that says app.set views, right? So the idea of views is in app views. So inside of our app folder, there might be a views folder as an example. And we're saying that, hey, get all of our views from the views folder. That's what this line is saying here. And then app.set view engine. What type of view engine? This is configuration. We're configuring the Express middleware. So the stuff that's layered on top of Node, we're configuring and saying, hey, we're using this folder for views, and we're also using this kind of engine to serve out our files, because there's different ways of serving out files. And again, kind of out of scope for this course, but you can, there's many, many different view engines that Express supports. And once we've done this, right, it allows us to switch from one view to the other. So again, let's talk about, before we go on anymore with Express, let's talk about those real advantages to use Express, right, as opposed to Node by itself. It layers on top of Node, gives us more functionality, extends the request and response objects, right? You know, it gives us the ability for us to create this or utilize the MVC pattern, design pattern, and so we can separate concerns, right? Really focusing on different parts of our application. And what it does allows us to make this enterprise level application, right? All with JavaScript on the back end, in the middle, and on the end, right? On the front end, right? So middle meaning the database, right? So it's really, really cool how this is done and how this has evolved. And I would love to spend more time talking about it today, but I can't because I got to move on to other things. But let's take a look, use this kind of idea to create our new app. I'm going to redirect you now a little bit to the Express website. So if you click on the Express website, this is it. This is where you get information about how to install Express. I'm just going to populate this on our COMP125 general channel, so you guys can get to it as well. Here's our general channel. Okay, so that is where we get our Express information and how the API is all documented there nicely, right? So if we scroll down, you can see that it talks about how to make web applications. A lot of popular frameworks have been made with Express. And also it says that Express is at 4.16.3. Remember mine in the PowerPoint was like 4.8, and that was only in winter. So you can see we've moved quite a bit forward inside of our Express. I mean, Express keeps kind of moving forward in terms of security and a lot of that kind of stuff that's been added lately. So how do I install Express? I could definitely do it this way, but we want to probably use the Express generator, which we're going to get into in a second. So if I was going to go installation, here's my installation details. Just like we've known before, we can use NPM. We can also use Yarn, which we've been doing. And when we install Express, it's just a module that we get. And then if I want to do a hello world, this is a good example of what an Express hello world would look like, right? So we can also target a different version of nodes. We can say we want to target node version 10.8. Doesn't really matter. This isn't going to change much, right? But you can see that this will actually run Express. Kind of load Express like we've seen, and we have a basic route for kind of the defaults route of the site, and we're going to res send hello world, which we've seen before. I'm not going to do this. Typically, I would in COMP125. I'll probably go through this whole exercise, but you guys have already done this last week in detail with Node, and it's very similar. Syntax is slightly different. And then we run the app just like we normally do with Node. Where I really want to get into is this idea of the Express generator. So the Express generator is a command line interface that allows us to scaffold out a whole application in about 2 minutes, right? Now, why am I using a scaffold? Because it saves us the trouble of doing two things. I don't have to go into my folder and create a structure by myself. I don't have to do that. And it's the same structure, the same pattern that we would use over and over again to create this Express application. So why would I do that by hand when I can have an Express generator do it for me? And there's some proponents and opponents to this thing. You know, proponents say, you know, it saves time. Opponents say, yes, but now everything looks the same and maybe it's structured the same way. And you don't have to use the express generator. I recommend it to start off with. When we install the express generator, we install it like this. We use NPM. We can't use yarn because yarn is just for front end stuff, right? So if I'm going to pull up my command line, let's just do it together. Please do it with me because you're going to need it for today. I'm going to go into my command prompt, and I'm going to say exactly what it says here: npm install express -generator, right? And it's -g for global. Okay, and what this is going to do is it's going to access the express generator, the latest version. And you can see that it's also warning me that a major version of npm is available. That now from 5.6 I can move to 6.3. And I'm going to say it's okay. I'm not going to do that right at this moment, but I will update it at some point this week. And it tells you how to update npm. Yeah, this is probably going to work, but I'd rather do it another way. So I got the express generator, and you can see that it's 4.16.0. That's the express generator that I'm using. So that's how the installation works, just like we've done with other modules, right? And notice here are some popular view engines. EJS for -E. There's also Handlebars. Handlebars is also another view engine that's very popular. It was actually before Express, right? And actually, AngularJS took a lot of the stuff that we use in Handlebars to create their, double mustache or double curly brace. When we inject stuff into Angular, we do it with double curly braces. The same thing we used to do with Handlebars, right? Pug is another view engine that's the default. If you don't put a -E, then you're going to get Pug, all right? So you need this -E switch whenever we use the express generator to get EJS, right? We're going to do all this on the command line right now. This is the stuff we need to do to configure the express generator when we're generating or configuring our website. I'm going to show you this in a second. Hogan, again, another engine that we can see. So there's several that it supports. It shows us 4 different view engines. And this is depending on the programmer's choice, right? Some people prefer EJS over Pug. Some people prefer the simplicity of Pug over EJS. EJS looks more like HTML, and Pug does not. Pug is a shortened version of HTML. So instead of an H1, you put a proper tag for H1, just put H1. And then it would inject or create the tags for you, right? You can also choose what type of CSS you want to use, right? So for example, you can use less and Sass, again, which is CSS on steroids. I recommend taking a look at that. Again, it's not part of our course, but if you looked at Sass, syntactically awesome style sheets, which is really cool. It's like compiled style sheets, right? So this is definitely something that you could use, CSS with superpowers. It allows you to do things like variables, inject variables, a lot of mix-ins. It simplifies CSS in a lot of ways. And if you're going to be a front-end developer, if that's your thing, you should learn Sass, all right? Because it's a very popular framework, okay? Again, we're not going to cover that because it's out of scope for what we're doing. But hey, I recommend taking a look at it. And I think it's worth mentioning. So I'm just going to put this right here on our Slack channel. So really, really cool. But you can choose that. That would be an option that you can choose with the express generator. So if you go through here, you can say that, you can say that, hey, if I use the -C option, I can specify the engine I want to use, like less or Sass or Compass or whatever, right? I can also specify that I want a gitignore file added in. It'll do it for us, right? And you can use the -F on a non-empty directory, which means if I already have stuff in there, if I already kind of developed something on my own, and I want to inject, use the express generator to add more scaffolding in there, I can use the -F option, and it'll scaffold anyway. And the way we do it is like this. We say express on the command line, -- the view engine. In this case, they're using Pug, right? And then the name of your application, which is the name of your folder. We're going to do this today, and we're going to use the name of my folder is going to be COMP125 -S2018 -lesson 13. That's going to be my name of my folder. That's what I'm going to put here, right? And it's going to go through and do all of this work for us. It's going to download and install stuff. It's going to scaffold it out. And once we're done, we're going to go into the folder and then do an npm install. However, there's another way of doing it without npm. You can also use yarn, because once you start using npm, going back to yarn is not going to happen. On Mac and on Windows is slightly different, right? But if you notice, the application structure you're going to get looks like this. This is really important, guys. So please pay attention to this one. So you're going to get this on the root. So here's your root of the folder, right? You're going to get a views folder, a routes folder, a public folder, a package.json, something called bin, right? Which I'm going to change because I don't like it, right? An app.js, okay? And my app.js is going to look at www inside the bin folder that has no extension. That's why I don't like it. For beginners, this is kind of confusing, and we're going to fix this problem, okay? But then what happens is in the public folder, we have our images folder, a JavaScript folder, a style sheets folder, and then inside the style sheets folder, we're going to have a style.css. I'm going to rename these things because I don't like it. I'm going to name JavaScripts to scripts. I'll name my style sheets to content. I'm going to change my images folder and put it inside of an assets folder, exactly like we've done every single time, right? Why is this? Because for us, that would be familiar, right? That's why I'm doing it. Not because this is wrong. I like my own version. So what this does is it sets up some folder structure that we can modify nice and easily, and we can incorporate our own style of doing things that we've done all semester. Okay, then you have this routes folder, and you're going to have two routes. One for index. The index route is usually the main route, so the top level pages, and you would have in there things like your home, about, contact, your 5 pages. Typically, you have on a 5-page site. Home, about, contact, products and services. You'd all have that on the index page, right? You can have another subpage. For example, if I had users, if I was logging in and if I had a backend, then I would use the users route. In our case, we don't need it, so we're going to remove it. We're not going to have a users routes because we're not going to do logging in and logging out in our case, okay? Also, take a look. In our views, we have 3 views. Now, we're not going to have a pug extension because we're going to be using EJS. All of our views are going to be named error.ejs, index.ejs, layout.ejs. That's what we're going to get, okay? And notice the views folder doesn't have any subfolders. We're going to create them. We're going to create a partial subfolder, and we're going to create a content subfolder. This is going to be done today and tomorrow, okay? So I'm telling you all this because once we've scaffolded this out, and you're saying, well, I could probably do it all on my own. You're changing so much. Yes and no. You're going to see the things that we get with it, and there's advantages to it. A lot of code that we're going to get starting off. And I think it's good to use this as a starter and then modify it to hell, right? Modification is a lot easier than building from scratch, always. All right. So that's really what we're going to get from a getting started perspective. That's the Express generator. Also, something we want to take a look at is our guide. Please take a look at this when you have a chance. This is important to understand how it's done. If you look at the routing guide, it talks about how routes are done, okay? And if you look at this as an example, we have our Express app, and we come down to there's different kinds of requests. If we do an app.get, it means we're using a get request, right? If we do an app.post, we're using a post request. And a post request is for things like the submit button of your form, right? A get request is like, hey, give me the form. Show me the form. So one shows you the form, renders the form for you, right? And the other one processes the form. So always think about post as processing your form or processing your information. And the get, and they're both, by the way, they're both the same root because they're looking at the default root, which is, this part right here. So if I had this was a contact page, it would be, let's say, /contact as an example. You would have the same root, /contact. So, but there's different kinds of requests. One is a get request. The other one is a post request. And these two requests are handled differently by Express. And there's other ways to do things too. So I'm just going to give you some examples here. I want to go through this so when you see it, you're not like, what is that? How do I, don't think about how. You're going to see examples of how to do it in a second. Okay, so, but here's some stuff that it really does for you. So if you go through, you can see that there's different kinds of routing that you can do, and you can respond with information about the routing that you're getting. So depending on the route, this might be the route. And then you have this function, this callback function, which is anonymous, but could be named if you really wanted to. to handle the route. And if I name it, what am I doing? I'm creating a controller. So the route is one part. The controller is this part, the part that's the function, right? So I could create a separate controllers folder that does all my logic, and that I import into Express, which we'll see maybe later on. If we have time tomorrow, we'll do it. All right, and we also have root parameters. Here's an example of what I talked about. The parameters itself, for example, this is the root. Someone says, I want users, and I want to put this colon user ID books colon book ID. Well, whenever we put these colons in here, right, on the URL, so this would be up here on the URL, what Express does, because remember, Express is the back end. This is the server side. It parses the URL path, right, and it gives us information. So a good example of that is if I say my requested URL is this, right? What this does is it says, hey, wherever I see user ID, right, I want to look at the user ID first. So I'm going to say, so this is my path, users, user ID, books ID. Okay, so users, user ID, books, book ID, right? And this parses the path so I can access that information. And once I have this, the rec.params variable, request parameter variable, is going to hold this information. It creates an object that holds that information for us. And of course, we can use that object to access the database, right? Because once I have those two pieces of information, I can do a search in the database, whatever database I want to use, and I can take the user and the book, and I can get information about it. So that's how Express routing works. So don't be surprised or freaked out by it when you see it. Again, I'm referring to the API documentation here. That's up on the Express website. It's really good documentation. It's up to date, and it works exactly like it says. And there's some really other good examples, right? So here's flights from and to, right? This is the path. And then you can see that if this is the URL, it would look at anything that matches flights, anything that matches to, right, with the colon. And you can see that there's a dash here, from to. So if I look at from to, there is no from to, but you see flights. Flights are there, right? So I say, well, here's flights in my URL, and I have these colon, from, dash, colon, to. This is a pattern. Remember we talked about using patterns, regular expressions. Think about this as like a regular expression, and it tells you, it says, once I see this dash, I say that anything before the dash is from, and anything after the dash is to. And of course, our rec params is going to be exactly that. From LAX to SFO, right? So that's what it does. So it's really, really cool. Very interesting the way they do things. And it talks about how to do route handling, right? And there's different ways of doing that we're going to be seeing later on. Okay, cool. So that's really it in a nutshell. I don't want to go too much into it. Let's do it. Let's do our first Express application. So I'm going to go to my desktop. I'm using my command line for this because this is how I want you to do it, right? All right? You're not following along? I'm on the desktop, and I've already installed Express, and what I want to do is now use Express. I'm going to type in the word Express, right? I'm going to type in -E for EJS. That's the EJS engine. And then I'm going to type in the name of my application, and I'm going to call it COMP125. Notice I'm using lowercase in this particular case, dash S2018 dash lesson 13. And when I press enter, it's going to do all that scaffolding for me.
You are already in where you are running the command. You don't have to.
You don't say it's not empty, and you have to use the dash F for force. That's all you have to do.
There are two kinds of
I'm using the plain one, plain command prompt. I just went right here and I went CMD and I pressed enter. That's how I did it for Windows. Okay. Well, you want to use one like this. I mean, Node, you don't really need the Node command prompt, but you can use GitHub. You can use whatever bash that you want to use. All right, so again, now I'm here, and if you look, I'm just going to look at my folders. Now let's take a look at that. Let's see if I can find that COMP125 S2018 folder. It just created it for us, right? So that's what we want to find. I want to show it to you on the desktop here because I have a messy desktop, but it should be here. And so what it did was it literally would create our folder structure the way we want, right? And just want to make sure I can find it for you. And I'm sorry, you probably saw it more faster than I did, yeah? The right-hand side, right? Remember, it's all lowercase, so you would notice it right away because it's lowercase. So is it down or up?
It's next to edge between that and Oracle. Yeah. Left-hand side.
My left-hand side, right?
Left.
No, keep going.
Left? Oh, here.
By edge.
So yeah, so there it is. So this is my folder, right? So you notice that I'm in there. So I can just do the same thing I normally do. So I can say CD space and then drag and drop my folder in there. So this is just this folder, right? And if I look into that folder, if I do a directory, you can see that it doesn't have anything. I don't have a node modules or anything like that. I've got to scaffold this out. And the way to do that is I want to say npm install or a yarn install. But I can't do yarn install because yarn is not initialized. So let's do that. That's the first change we're making. So we're going to say yarn init, right? What it's going to do is going to look to see that there is a package.json file already, and it's just going to accept whatever's in there already. We can use that 0.0.1 as our version. Our description is demo for Express generator. Entry point index.js. Is it? No. It's app.js, right? So we have to change that, app.js, right? That's our entry point. Our repository URL, we don't have one. We're going to go back in here again. My author, that's me. You can put yourself, right? MIT license is fine. Private is true, right? And we're done. Now that we've got a yarn, and if I do a directory again, we can see that everything looks almost identical, but I can do a yarn install. And if I did that, and if I did everything properly, it's going to look to see if it can resolve the packages that are missing. If I do a dir, you can see now that I have a node modules folder that I didn't have before because yarn installed all the packages that are listed in my package.json file. Okay, this is a great place to pull this into a Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to go down to Visual Studio Code. Yep.
We did yarn install. Is that it?
Yeah, yarn install. But you have to do yarn init first, right?
I did yarn init, and then I did yarn install.
Yeah, and if I just drag this in here, this has to be, you have to do it inside the folder, right? So if I do this, you can see that now I have a package.json folder with these requirements. So here's my dependencies. Here's my EJS. This is the version of EJS that I'm using. Here's the version of Express that I'm using. And these are the main dependencies. These are main main modules that I'm using, right? Alongside Express. And here's the new stuff that I got from Yarn. I got this stuff, right? Notice it says my start is in node.bin www. Now, I don't like that. Remember my www, this is my folder structure. Look at my folder structure. That's not what I want, guys. This is no good. I'm getting there. But in my nodes modules, you can see all my node modules got installed using Yarn install, right? So in my bin folder, I've got this www file, and it doesn't really have a type, but if you notice, it's just like a server.js. That's what it is, right? So the first order of business is fixing this problem. I want to take this www file and drag it out into the root, right? And I want to rename this www file into server.js. So I'm going to rename, and again, it's going to be server.js, okay? Now, inside server.js, this is the server. It requires app, but it has to go up one to app. This isn't true anymore. App is here. It's in the same folder. So I just want you to replace these double dots with one dot, like this. Okay, so I've just modified one thing in my app. I'm going to save that. That's my server.js. In my package.json, right, notice it talked about my main was app.js. Let's change that back. I made a mistake. It should be server.js now because that is the main place where it starts, server.js, right? And inside of my start, it can't be this anymore because I've taken my bin out. It's just going to be server.js, right? Because that's where we're going to start. All right, so I'm just modifying my package.json as I'm scaffolding. I no longer need the bin folder, so I'm going to delete it. So goodbye, bin folder. All right, cool. So I've got my node modules, my public, my routes, and my views. I've got a few views that I have here, like I said before. And in my public, I have these folders, right? I'm going to need to modify them. But let's see what I get before I modify them. Because we modify them too crazy is like, hey, what am I getting, right? So here's my server.js. My server.js just takes care of the server part. That's all it does, right? So what it does is it says, hey, I'm requiring my app. Okay, that's what it does. App.js, though, does all the work for us. It does, we're going to get HTTP errors. We're also getting Express. We're getting pathing. And you can see these are all vars. I hate vars. So the first thing I'm going to do is Control F, right, for find. And I'm going to change my var spaces into lets. I'm going to replace them with lets. Okay? And I'm going to just replace them all. This is a replace all. You can see that those all changed from vars to lets. Control F.
Yeah, you can Control F, then it doesn't.
Then if you click this little button here,
Oh, I see.
yeah. And that what I did was just replace my vars with lets to modernize what we're doing, right? Sorry? I haven't done that yet. I'm just doing all these changes first, and then I'm going to put it up on GitHub. All right, so HTTP errors, Express, there's our Express module. Path, that's built into Node. We're using that again. Cookie parser, that's a new module we've never used before. Morgan is our HTTP logger. That's what we're using, right? That's why it's called logger. Then we have two things, an index router, which looks at the /routes/index. And what it's doing actually is, it's when we use the require, we don't have to put the .js. Remember, we talked about this. Whenever we do a require locally, we don't have to use .js. This could actually be written like this instead. Oops. Like this, and it'd be the same as like this. Because we're using a require statement, it knows that we're probably going to require a JavaScript file, so we don't have to include that extension. It's automatic, all right? Or implied, I think is the way to say it. All right, and so what it does, it says, hey, look inside the routes folder. That's what the index router is. Look inside of our index.js, and that's where our routes are sitting. So it's broken out our routes instead of it being in one place, instead of another file, inside the routes folder. All right, then as we go skip down, we create an Express object. That's what we're doing here. Like we said, we're setting up our engine, our view engine. And like it said, we're actually using the path to join our directory name views to the path. So that way, we never have to put views in there. We just have to say whatever the view is that we want, right? And then the view engine, we've instead of Pug or Jade, is EJS. That's the view engine we've decided to use, okay, as programmers. Our logger we've set to development, and if you actually scroll over or kind of hover over it, you can see that logger, our format dev, right, and our options. These are all the ways we can log our any HTTP requests that we get. If we really didn't want to, we wouldn't need logger necessarily. It's a nice little addition. A lot of the stuff we do with logging and testing, sometimes we turn that stuff off because at this point, we're just learning how to use Express, right? We're also using JSON because when we do this, express.json, what we're doing is we're enabling JSON so we can parse our body if we need to, right? We're also encoding the URL, right? And we're using the cookie parser. We're enabling all these things. When we say app.use from an Express perspective, we're actually enabling a lot of these modules to work with Express. That's what we're doing, okay? Very, very high level. We're also using an static route. Here's a new static route. And what we're doing is we're joining the directory name public to the static route. So I never have to say public / whatever. As long as it's inside the public folder, Express will know that it's part of our path. Why is that important? So if I want to use any kind of CSS, JavaScript, or whatever, I can do it right in there, and I don't have to use the keyword public. So I never have to use public, and I never have to use views, ever. It's implied. It's included in our path. It'll search views or public when we make a request. Again, there are two different routes. I'm just going to go here. One of them is the / route that we've enabled, and the other one is /users. Obviously, we're not going to need this route, so we're going to take it out, but not right now. Okay. We're also going to say that we're going to use this error 404. We use the create error. Notice create error up here is we're actually enabling or requiring another thing called HTTP errors. HTTP errors. Do we see that in our package.json? Right. Yes, it's another module that we're getting as part of the new Express generator package. So HTTP errors takes care of that. It actually categorizes them, right? So let me go back to that app.js. So and scrolling down, you can see that it creates the error. And then we app use, and what we're saying is that we have some local error messages. We can also set the development environment as a default. So right now we're in development. We can also change this to production. And if we change this to production, then we use different kinds of ports. Okay. Here, the error page, if there's some kind of error, if we ever get down here, we can set the status to 500, which is a server error somehow. And we'd render error because we don't know what kind of server error we're getting. And notice we have this module.exports app. Why is that? Because we're taking this whole app.js and injecting it into my server.js. So my server.js is taking that whole thing. We're creating a variable that reflects all that work we've just done. So here's app, right? And then what we're doing down in here is we're saying something like this. We're saying that I'm requiring my HTTP server, right? Like we did last week, okay? And then we're normalizing that port. Hey, it's being written for us. That whole port sanitization thing we did, it's doing it for us here. Where we're taking either port 3000 or the process.environment port, so we can put this up on Heroku or Microsoft Azure or something else. And whatever the port works, we're going to set that port as the main port for our application. Okay? And then we're creating our server object, where we're using the create server here. This is on the Express generator side. We don't have to do this, but the Express generator does it for us, right? And then we're listening on that port. And we're also creating two new event listeners, one for errors and one for listening itself. So error and listening. And notice on error, right? On error is an actual function. So if you go down here, on error, it handles different kinds of errors. Remember these things? Access, in use. It actually handles these two errors. One is requires elevated privileges if we want to actually look at that site. The other one is, hey, this port is already in use, right? So it takes care of those two errors. And that's on error, okay? Which is really cool to do. And the other one is listening goes on listening. So let's see if we can see there's an on listening area. Here's on listening. And what it does basically says when we're listening, just regular, so there's no error, then what we want to do, we can say what we're listening on a particular port. And that's what it's doing. Yes. Sorry? I'm never going to get you to type this by yourself. If anything, I might ask you to do I might suggest you use the Express generator on the exam. I might say that. Say, use the Express generator like we saw for assignment number 4, right? That's what I ask you guys to do for assignment number 4. And on the exam, you do the exact same thing. You just use the Express generator, scaffold things out, exactly like we're doing. Usually, my assignments train you for the exam. So if I gave you assignment 3 that's asking you for Ajax and assignment 4 that's using Express, chances are something from assignment 3 and something from assignment 4 is going to be in the exam. Okay. So that's what these two things do. Now I've gone into a lot of detail here because otherwise you don't know how the heck this whole thing works, right? One of the biggest things with students is they don't understand how Express is bundled together, right? They don't know how it connects and how it's activated. But we know from last week that all I have to do is go node app.js on the command line. So if I went to the command line and if I said node, server, it would actually be server.js. Then it should just run if I don't have an error, right? So now notice that I'm not getting any feedback, right? Doesn't mean that there's an error. Just my application doesn't give me feedback right now, right? Let's see if this actually runs. So if I was going to go to my, well, not this one. I want this one to stay the way it is. I want it to go to here. And if I was to run it on localhost 3000, then we should see Express, right? So we know it's running. But remember, I told you also last week, what is a good, from a development environment, what do I recommend? Don't use node space and something else. I highly recommend using nodemon because nodemon gives us some feedback, right? And we don't have to regenerate the server. Now, here's what it does give you. Notice that it gives you some, this version actually responds with the kind of messages you're going to get, all right? We have already a 404, favicon.ico, right? What's a favicon.ico? What is that? It's a favicon icon that we don't have for our website. And because our app.js, if you look at app.js in the top, it actually requires the use of a favicon. And let me just show you that. So it's basically what we're doing is we're saying, hey, we're getting path and cookie parser and all this kind of stuff, right? And then somewhere in here, right, we're requesting a favicon, right? And a favicon basically, gets posted on the top portion of your page, which we're going to see later on. And if you can find that by either it's either in app.js or server.js, typically. Yeah. Let's take a look at server. Somewhere in here, we're looking for a favicon. And we can comment that out. So if I was going to look for it, if I could say favicon, if it was here, it would come out. So it's no results. But what about app.js? Right? It's not even here. So somewhere else. Somewhere it's looking for a favicon. It could be in our views as well. Right? So one of those two places. So that's why we got that 404 error. So if you look at that 404 error we're getting here, we're trying to get a favicon that doesn't exist. Okay? We can get a favicon. We can make a favicon later on. But it's running. It's running on this. Notice we got a 200 for this slash. Slash means, hey, this is our root of our website. That's what slash means, right? And it's also activating our style sheet, our style.css. And that's inside of our public. But notice it doesn't say public style sheet style.css because public is part of our path. It's been joined to our path. We don't have to put that in there, right? So a good example of that is if I go back to our site here and if I say slash style sheets, right? If I did spell that properly, style sheets, yes, slash style, is it style? Style.css. If I do that, I should get the style sheet, right?
No, I guess only for JS.
Public, right? So public is included style sheets because style sheets is inside of a public folder, right? I don't have to put public / style sheets. I can just put style sheets.
Well, you're saying because you don't have to put index.js. You don't put the JS.
That's
so
in the require. CSS, that's in the require. We don't have to put the JS in the require. For our JavaScripts, we don't have a JavaScript right now, and so on. That's what really our thing looks like. But if I change anything, I have to regenerate the server, which is no good. So I want to use NodeMon. So I want to Control C, and I want to clear the screen, and I want to use NodeMon instead, like we did last week. So NodeMon. And NodeMon does the exact same thing, but if I make a change to the server, it automatically regenerates this part. So if I go back and if I refresh, if I go back to this and I refresh it, you can see that I'm still going to get the same feedback on the bottom that I did before, right? And this is coming from the Express generator. That's what we're getting here, okay? So you can see that this is what I'm getting from Express. Okay, so go ahead. I want you to create, you should already have this site working. And I want to put this up on GitHub now. This is a good place to put it up on GitHub and do version control, okay? Because we've got our Express running right now. This is our base case, and we're going to modify it, and we're going to change it to our liking today. And tomorrow, we're going to actually scaffold it out and make a real site from it, similar to what you need to do your assignment number 4, okay? So how does this work? First of all, do we have to stop anything? No, but I do have to initialize GitHub. So I'm going to kind of go into here in Visual Studio Code. I'm going to go to the top here, and it's going to say, hey, where do you want to instantiate the repository? I'm going to do that again. So right here with this little GitHub symbol, I can initialize repository. I'm going to do it inside my COMP125 S2018 lesson 13 folder. I could have. You might have to do it with, I have GitLens. GitLens, yeah, GitLens might have done that for me.
You have to go into your source control.
Yeah, so if you go, yeah, you have to do that too. But if you go to GitLens, there's 2 things. I've actually installed GitLens, which is really cool, right? But if you go into your source control icon, I get it there anyway. All right, this is what it should be, source control. Then I want to initialize my repository as Git, and then kind of initialize everything I have in here. Now notice also I have, when I initialize, I have this package.json, and I also have all this stuff, like all this stuff, and a bunch of other stuff in my node modules. Again, you may want to put a git ignore if in a professional environment, because before we've been using Bootstrap and all that stuff in here. I haven't asked you to do it, and I'm still not going to ask you to do it because we've been using Bootstrap with Yarn, right? If I was using Bootstrap with Bower or some other way of getting Bootstrap, let's say, for example, I was using a CDN, I wouldn't need node modules, and so then I would exclude it from my GitHub, right? For now, though, I'm including it. So this is all my files. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say something like, I'm going to go to the top. The way I did that, of course, is it's like just doing like a git init. That's what it's equivalent when I did this thing, like a git init. And if you didn't do this, I'm just going to stop this or add another thing here, another server. It's the same thing as me doing git init. Okay, if I did git init, you can, by the way, you can reinitialize this way. It's exactly the same thing as when I clicked here and clicked up here. Okay. Now this, I see that these changes, I'm just using the user interface. If I click this little plus button, it stages everything like normal. So I stage everything. That's like doing a git add dot. Okay, equivalent to when this is done, right? It's like saying git add dot. That's exactly what I just did when I clicked that plus button. Okay. And now that I've got that, I want to add a friendly message for the commit, which is first commit or initial commit. And if I click this little check mark, it creates my first commit or initial commit. Okay, but I can't push anywhere because I don't have anywhere to push to, right? So I got to do all that work on the GitHub server, right? So I'm going to go to GitHub and go in Centennial College. And on GitHub, I'm going to make a new repository. Of course, we're going to call it the same as our folder. I'm just going to use capitals in this case. Okay, there we go, comp. S2018 lesson 13. And once I have that, all I need is these last two lines of code right here. I'm going to copy them and go back to our Visual Studio Code like we've done a bunch of times, right? Right-click and press Enter. And then that should push everything up to the master branch. All right, cool. So if you look at that, then if I refresh, you could see everything we've just done. This is the Express generator and all the files from the Express generator so far up on GitHub. Okay. I'm doing this because you want to track my progress here, guys, because we're going to make a lot of changes. Okay, so that's change number one. We've kind of like this is our base case. Okay. And by the way, notice that there's no description, website, or topics provided. I can add topics on GitHub. I've never shown you this. You can say something like, this is our demo for Express generator. I can do that. I can say demo project, these are topics, demo project. So I'll say Express generator, Express Just generator. That's what that topic is, right? That's our topics, which is kind of cool. So it allows people to find your Git repository based on some keywords if they want to find your stuff. You can also put in Node.js. Like Node.js might be something we want to kind of people to find. We also want people to find us based on Express. Here's Express.js, and so on. You can add as many topics or meta keywords as you want so that your files can be easily found. I can also edit my description. I can say something like demo project for Express generator. And if I have a website, I can put my website. I don't have a website right now. Save. And then it'll actually show it up there. So actually say that here's my demo project for Express generator, and actually be part of the Git repository. And this is not a wiki or a README file, but I could do that. I could add a README file too. Let's do that here, and then I'll pull the README file down. So I'll add a README file, and the README file will be COMP125 and so on. And demo project for Express generator. Look, it took the description and put it inside the README file automatically, right? And then if I just commit new file, it'll create a README file right here. This is a little wiki or README, right? And now we're behind. We have two commits, and we only have one commit locally, so we have to pull, right? So going back locally, if I want to be in sync, I'm going to type in pull on the command line, and what it's going to do is going to give me an error. So the term pull, git pull. How about that? And git pull will do everything I want it to. It'll add readme.md. There it is. I was just the exact readme file. And now I'm up to date. So why did I do all that? I configured my GitHub a little bit differently, but it's almost exactly the same. All right, a couple things that I want to look at. We want to rejig some of this stuff like we talked about. I'm going to do that here now before we move on, right? So one thing I said was that we've got our create error, express, path, cookie parser, logger, all this stuff, but I don't need this part. I don't need this users router, right? Because I'm never going to have a users router. I'm just going to get rid of it. Before I do that, though, if you go to routes, and if I go to index, you can see that this is what the route would look like. This is our routing page. So this is an example of a route where we create an express router, an instance of express router inside of our routes, right? So router represents express.router. That's what it represents, right? And then I can say router.get. We're going to get the home page, right? And notice it says res render. Remember we talked about res? On the response object, render the index.ejs page. That's what this says, right? And I'm going to pass in a title object. This is an object. I'm going to pass in the title express. What if I just pass in the title instead of express? What if I passed in express demo? And if I press save? Well, once I do that, it regenerates everything. And if I go back to here and refresh, I can see express demo because it injects that piece of code into our view. How does it do that? When I do res render in index, if I didn't have this part, right, that means this part is what I'm actually injecting a variable into my page. Here's my views. Let's take a look at my index.ejs. EJS looks like a regular page, right? However, if you notice on the bottom where it says HTML, it's not really HTML. It's actually EJS. So if you want to really, file associate, it's really you want to, find EJS as the file association type. We don't have support out of the box for EJS for Visual Studio Code, right? So we want to add that support. We go to extensions. And if I put in EJS, you can see that EJS language support for Visual Studio Code is an option, right? Now there's different ones that have that. And if you click on them, you can see what it does. Some of them have much better, information in here. As an example, EJS documentation, EJS snippets, EJS evaluation, so it evaluates EJS. It doesn't matter which one, as long as we get EJS support. And if you look at this actual site, this is the site for the EJS support module, right? You can get information from this guy. Now, usually the ones that get listed first are the ones that are the most popular. That's also something that you want to look at. So if you look here, you can see that there's 65,000 downloads for this EJS extension, right? But the other thing is it's at 0.0.1, where this one is 0.3.2, right? And this has 19,567 downloads. Also, you get a bit of a rating when it comes to your extensions, right? So there's 4 stars. This is like 3.5 stars. And you can see the snippets. This snippets is 5 stars for EJS snippets. And what snippets do is allows you to kind of use EJS a little bit easier. For me, it doesn't really matter, guys. You want EJS support, though, because otherwise it'll error out one or the other. It doesn't matter, right? I'm just going to install this one. Even though it's rated 3.5 stars, I'm going to install it anyway, right? Remember, we can always uninstall it. Let me reload this thing. Reloading will actually stop my server, right? So be careful of that. And now if I go back to that EJS page, which is down in here, if I click on index.ejs, it should recognize down here that it's EJS in Visual Studio Code. Okay? You can always switch it back, though. If you don't like it, you can always go back to HTML, right? And why is that? Why would I care about that? Because sometimes EJS doesn't give us the support that we want from an HTML perspective, especially for Emmet. EJS doesn't support Emmet, but HTML does, the supported language type. So that's why I've put it in here. So it kind of sees it as an EJS page, right? Okay, let's take a look here. So here's my index.ejs. So this is being loaded when I go to my root, the root of my folder, this /, right? And if you notice, there's this % equals title %, right? Well, what this is EJS. This is the EJS part right here. It says anything that has less than % and % greater than, that is what I can inject stuff in there. I can inject JavaScript right inside my page using EJS, right? So I'm injecting the title variable right here. And % equals, right, as an example, it says that this area here in the title of my head is actually injecting the title that comes from my route right here, Express Demo. So whatever I put in here, gets injected right in here. Okay. Now this is static, right? But can you imagine instead of this being static, that came from a database. I read something from a database and it creates my page for me, right? This is the real advantage of EJS. It allows me to do this kind of view management. And you're going to see that in COMP125 coming up. All right. Same thing. So this is the one thing that it does, Express Demo. It's and whatever I type in here, it'll be in there. And if you look at index.ejs, you can see that it also puts it inside of my H1 tag. So here's an H1 tag, and it injects the title in there too. And if I want, I can inject whatever other variable I want to list. Yes.
So you're using HTML.
Oh, well, it's using HTML, but I'm actually injecting the title in here.
They're EJS.
Yeah, this is EJS, right? By the way, for people who want to learn EJS, if I go back up, and if I want to learn EJS, right, there is a embedded JS site. This is the EJS site, right? That's what it comes from, embedded JS, right? And it gives you a syntax for how to embed stuff. For example, a for loop. I can embed a for loop right in here instead of doing it on the front end. So instead of using JavaScript on the front end and using a for loop with JavaScript, I literally just type it inside my view in my EJS, and it does it in there for me, right? So that's kind of a different way of doing things. I'm going to take this little link here so you can have it. This is the syntax for EJS. And again, going back here, I'm just going to kind of in there so you can see that. So that's EJS, embedded JS. That's where it stands for. And that's why people like EJS, even though it's a little older than Pug. And if I was going to look at Pug syntax, just to give you a difference. So here's Pug, right? Not Pug, the dog. Pug view engine. What I mean, of course. And so it's Pug.js, right? And Pug.js looks like this. P for paragraph, hashtag name, which is the same thing as saying a paragraph with an ID of name, right? And so you install Pug, and then when you're actually in your view engine, all you have to type is, P as an example, or name is Timothy, and here's I'm going to render the file template.pug, and template.pug, depending on what it has in it, it's going to install, it's going to actually inject the paragraph as well. It does one step further. And so I find this is less intuitive. It's less intuitive than, for some beginners, than as an example, like P hello world is like, put hello world inside of a paragraph tag and inject it. Okay, that's what it, so it takes the whole paragraph tag and injects it in there. I find that sometimes people have more trouble using this than just rendering everything out with EJS, right? Yeah.
So for instance, the render function, you can type in actual HTML in
Yes.
the render function,
Yes.
and it'll render the web.
Yeah, like a template.
Okay. So
That's what we're doing. We're using templates, right? So Vue.js, the thing you saw was actually a template, right? Because I can load any page like that. Okay, here's an example of that.
So why do we need the JS?
Let me show you. So this is a template, right? Even though we're using this as a index.html, let's make a new route. So go back to my routes. And instead of getting this, let's get another route. So I'm going to just copy this part. Again, I'm in my routes folder inside my index.js folder, and I want to make a new route, right? If I go in here, and instead of typing slash, I want to do a slash about. Okay, just another route, right? Still using the index page. But instead of express demo, it's going to say about express. So what it looks like to the user, it looks like this. It looks like there's two pages, but there's no
But
two
it's
pages.
just dynamically changing.
Correct. Which is part of what we did with Ajax when we use dynamic routing, right? And switching. So if I go back to, let's just do NodeMon, yeah.
You don't have to change the clear text
Nope.
after render?
Nope. I'm using the same template, and I'm injecting different data into that template.
Oh, so that
Right?
would just be, you'd only change what comes after the render.
Yeah.
You'd only change
This part.
changing your
It's just
template.
changing the path.
I'm just using the,
access.
so now the title, there's two paths. One is my slash path, and the other one is my slash about path. All right, so what does this mean? If I go back to my Express website here,
Yes.
and if I refresh, you can see it's Express Demo, but if I go /about, and if I press enter, now it's going to say About Express.
So if it was like an actual website, you have your website name /about and technically
And a bunch of
still
other,
the
you can,
index page.
exactly, and you can have a bunch of other data that's in there, right, if you want to, right?
Oh,
So that's how.
That's where it's just a single page app.
That's a single page application, right? Single page application, I'm injecting data, same thing, right? But I'm using the templates,
Content.
correct, right? So, but if I type something else, like if I typed in the contact page, I haven't defined a contact route, right? So if I did this, I would get a 404, not found, right? And I want to create a custom 404, just like we've done before, because this is ugly, right? And we're going to get this not found error. This not found error is generated because we're not handling the 404 error, which we're going to do. Maybe if I have time tomorrow, we'll do a custom 404, right? But remember, this not found 404 is being generated by Express. It's not coming from nowhere. It's coming from us. We made this happen, or we didn't change anything, so it's happening, right? This is the default configuration for 404 errors, right? So again, we've defined two routes here, / and about. Let's make a few more. Let's make the contact page now. So if I was going to make the contact page with whatever I want for now, we'll just call this contact, right? And we'll say, you know, contact page, contact me.
This is the part where you don't need a switch statement.
Exactly. You know, this is the switch statement right here,
Yeah.
right? This is like my switch statement. So I save it, and if I go back and if I refresh, you can see now it's going to say contact me and welcome to contact me, right? Why is that? Because I'm creating my routes dynamically right here. I'm literally listing them whatever I want in here, right? And I can create as many of these routes as I want. Now it becomes kind of tedious if I go in too much like this. If I have a page with thousands of routes or a site with thousands of routes, I have another system of doing this differently. But for us, for our little site that's due for assignment 4 next week, this is all you need to do, right? However, instead of rendering an index, I could have different pages that I'm rendering here as well. For example, if I take my index.ejs, which is this, right, and I copy it and I save it, I kind of paste it in here, right? And now instead of index, I call this, I rename this as about. So here's my about.ejs, right? It's exactly like the other one. There's no difference, right? Exactly like the other one, right? But somehow, for whatever reason, I want to switch from one to the other. Instead of putting index down here, I can change this to about. And then it's not going to have any difference. But you can see now there's two different pages loading. One is the index page, and when I'm in the about, it's the about page. So I can have multiple, it supports multiple pages as well.
So technically you could have, you're basically gonna have templates.
I can have as many templates as I want.
And then you just change the objects.
Correct. Whatever objects I want. My objects are here, and if I want to add other things in here, instead of my title, if I also wanted to put in author, let me add another little object. So I say, well, it's not just title, but I also want to put in author, right? I can put whatever I want in this little object that I'm sending, right? For example, I could say that author is me, right? Okay, cool. I've got my title and author. And if I don't request it using EJS, it's ignored. Anything I pass into the into this object here, right here, okay, as an example, it's being sent to the page to render. So what's happening is this. I have my view. I get information from these objects here. It goes into my view, and then it creates the page for me. The view engine creates the page. There is no page, right? The view engine creates the HTML for me, all right? So if I was to do this, and in my about, if I go to my about.ejs page, in my about, instead of saying, welcome to this, here's my title, I can just put author. Let's change it. Or instead of an H, let's just change it completely. Let's say this is an H2, right? Notice I'm not getting Emmet support because I'm in EJS. If I go back to HTML, and I got to show you these changes, guys, because you're going to run into these problems yourself. If I go back to HTML, if I go H2, now I get Emmet support, right? Where I can say something like my author is %, right, equals to author, right, %. And I can put in other stuff in there like author, right? And it's an H2 tag now. So this author only exists for about.ejs. I'm only asking for it because my about path, which is here in my index.html. So this is my home page. This could be my about page. And this could be my contact page, okay? Right now, my contact page my contact page and my home page use the same template, okay? But my about page uses a different template. And the difference between one template and the other is these lines right here. That's the difference. That's the only difference. Everything's the exact same right now, right? So now, hopefully, author is good. Let's see if I didn't make a mistake. So I'm passing in author, and author is being passed in with a lowercase a. I have to use the exact same. Think about it as a variable. When I go into my about page, it has to be a lowercase variable. And I'm using this syntax where less than % equals and % greater than. Anything that I put in there, right, is like using JavaScript, right? So if I press save, and if I go back, remember, if I press save, because I'm using NodeMon, everything gets saved automatically and restarted every time I make any changes. If I go back out to my about page, so about, then I get this, right? What's happening is, just to go through it again one more time, in my index, I'm injecting this property here, this object right here, and I can put whatever information or any kind of properties I want. I can pass in an array, okay? Let's do that for the contact page. So in my contact page, let's make it another page. We'll call that contact, right? And we'll make another page here, another view, another template. All right, so I'll base it off the about page. Okay, so copy. Again, you don't have to do it this way. You can do it different ways. I'm just showing you that it supports this as well. Rename, contact. Here's my contact page. And right now it takes author, but I don't want author. I want an array. All right, I want an array of authors, let's say. Okay, so not just this, but an array of authors. How do I do? I want to do a for loop in here. I want to show multiple objects here, as an array of authors. How do I do that? First of all, I got to pass in the array. So going back into my index.js, contact is going to use the contact template. Contact me is going to be put in there. Plus, I can have in there, right, as another object. I'm just going to separate this in different lines so you can see it easy. Another thing called authors, right, which instead of being an object could be an array, right, of authors like Tom, Mark, right, Luke, Jaden, why not, right? I'll put whatever author I want just because Jaden's here. Yeah, I gotta. Just kidding. And how about John? John's here, right? Let's put John, right? All right. I can't include everybody, right? But let's just put. So I got all these authors, and I want to list all these authors as a list, right? Okay. Well, again, and this is kind of my thing. So I have there's 3 different objects here. One that just has my title. Let me just break this out so it looks the same. This is what the title would look like, right? And this goes to my index page, my home page. This one is my contact page. I have 2 things that I've defined, title and author, and the other one is title and authors. Title and authors. So if I have to modify my contact, this won't work anymore, right? However, if I do this, authors, will it work? It will. But what am I going to get? Let's see what I get. Let's see what I get. Let's see what I get, right? I want to see what I get here. So here's authors, right? And I'm going to go to contact. So I'm going to go to my contact page. Right? Isn't that interesting? Right? So it injects, but that's not cool. That's not what I wanted. I want a list of authors, right? So how do I do that? Well, let's go back to the documentation for our for EJS to learn that, right? So remember, this is Express. So if I go back to my Pug reference, there is a EJS reference page. Let's go back. Here it is. And I want to do a loop like this. Look, this is exactly what I want to do, right? Here's my for loop. For every authors.length, right, I want to inject a list item, right, of the author. That's pretty simple. That's how stupidly easy it is. So let's do that. So we'll say authors here, and then that's my H2 tag right there. And then we'll make a UL. So we'll do a UL. And inside of my back EJS, I am. Sorry, I'm just putting it in there because it doesn't give me the errors with EJS. Whereas I can use, with HTML, I can use Emmet. I just click on the actual object here, and I can choose whatever I want, right? So if I go author, I can do a UL. Inside of the UL, I want a list item for now. That's one list item. But this list item is going to be repeated, right? So what I want to do is give them some space in here, and I want to inject my for loop. So I want to say something like this, for, right? And what I want to do is just a regular for loop for, and again, EJS may not support let. Just putting it out there, right? EJS is a separate version of JavaScript, right? So no. So if you notice, if it says var, some things you can do with EJS or JavaScript, especially ECMAScript 6, will not work with EJS. You have to use the old version like this, right? So for var, and again, let's call it count, author count is equal to 0. We know how to do it. Just use var instead of let. Where count is less than authors dot length, because we know we're going to get authors, right? Count plus plus, right? And normally what you do is you put a curly brace and a closing curly brace, but you can't do that because what you want to do is you want to have this is a partial piece of code. So this partial piece of code starts the for loop. We have our list item, and then this partial piece of code ends the for loop with the closing curly brace. So this embeds JavaScript around here, right? That's how it works. That's how EJS works. And what I can do in my list item is I can put in the name of the author. So I can say that authors square bracket count, right, is going to go in there. But I need to put this in EJS formatting, which is this. This is equal to authors count, which equal means the value. Get the value of whatever's in here and put it in, inject it in here. And so what this does is it creates a number of list items based on the number of authors that I get. Okay, let's see if this works, because maybe I made a mistake, right? Going back, I go back out the contact me page, and I refresh the page, and then I get this. Right, so now it creates a number of lists. If I actually look at the page, so if I go to a views page source, you can see that I've actually got one list item for each of my authors, right? So it actually creates, it's almost like doing a document.create, right, for each of those list items. And it creates it in the shadow DOM and injects it in here, right, which is kind of cool. So it updates the DOM by using append child on the back end. All the same stuff we would do on the front end, JavaScript is doing on the back end. Okay, so we're actually manipulating the front end by using a back end, you know, kind of Express is doing it for us. However, I want to tell you this. You don't have to do any of this stuff. In fact, you don't even have to have a view engine activated in Express whatsoever. If you want to do all your view stuff with the front end, you can just get void a view engine altogether, and then just use static files that are inside of your public. All right, so this is what this is. This is an example. I got to finish this off by changing our presentation here. So I've added these four roots or three roots. 1, 2, 3.
Static files.
Yes, you can do that too. But it's not. What's the point,
Yeah,
right? The point of Express is it gives you the ability to do this, right? That's what the idea is. You can do this kind of stuff, right?
So if you were to just type in your render, if you were to actually write different JavaScript code for, so let's say you do it like,
Oh, in here?
yeah, and the way you reference objects would be like curly braces
Yes,
inside the
yes,
HTML,
yes.
and it would work the same.
Yes. You can actually define the objects here. This is all JavaScript. You can define a whole class up here and then include it. I don't like var.
Like you can have
Yes, you can do it in.
HTML code.
You could do it inline, yes,
Oh,
if you really want to. But just be careful. That's all. I'm changing these to lets. I'm doing this part. And now I don't need the users. Users are only for users accessing my files. I'm just going to delete this file altogether. This is the first change. Delete. So no more users.js, which means that it's going to look for it and cause an error in my code, right? So in my app.js, it actually looks for this thing, but it doesn't exist anymore. So I'm going to get rid of it. So on line 8 of my app.js, I'm just going to get rid of this piece because I don't need it anymore. I'm modifying my application now. And also, down later on, it's also going to use it down here on line 22. So I got to get rid of line 22 as well. All right, so those two places, line 8, line 22, my app.js, because I'm not looking for that stuff anymore, right? All right, cool. Inside my, let's do one further thing. I've got a few view templates, but inside of my public, I don't want things to be this way, like I talked about. This is no good. I want my JavaScripts to be in scripts. So I'm going to rename this folder and call it scripts. And I'm going to rename this folder, right? So I'm going to rename and call it content. But because my JavaScript is actually being referenced by my templates, I have to update my templates in a second. And instead of images, I don't have an image, but if I had my images in here, I would just refresh this page or redo this thing and rename it to assets. And then if I wanted an images folder, I would put it inside my assets folder, like new folder, images. Because that makes sense, right? Assets, images, assets, audio, assets, fonts, assets, whatever you want, right? So that's maybe movies, whatever you want in there, right? So this is the way I really want it to be. But because I changed my style sheets to content, I got to go into my index.ejs. Here's my index.ejs. And I got to change this stuff. So it can't be style sheets anymore. It's got to be content, right? Because that's the new route. And same thing with my contacts. By the way, I'm going to show you how to fix this tomorrow, so you don't have to do it once, right? And same thing with my about. Those are all fixed, right? And furthermore, I don't like my style.css. I hate that. I want it to be called app.css, right? So let's rename that. I'm just renaming stuff, which means that this has got to change here. Back to what we normally are used to, right? That's what I'm trying to do. And, you know, that's going to change in my index.ejs. And that's going to also change in my contact.ejs. When I've done all these changes, I'm going to just close all these down for a second. Yep. Give me a second. I'll show you. That's one of the biggest questions that people have, Jay. And the answer is my server calls my server.js calls my app. This app gets injected here on line 7. App is here, app.js. App.js, right? What it does is it includes all these different modules, right? It defines the view engine, like we said before. And then once we've done all this, it says that views, the views folder is included in the path. I never have to put views something, right? And further down, it says that public is also included in the path, right? So if I put slash, I don't have to ever put slash public, anything. So what it does is it searches inside of my my templates in my about page. If I put slash contact, it searches 2 places, the views and the path and my public. So it searches views and public and says, hey, I found it in public. Great, inject it. And that's what it does. So the Express server itself finds the stuff for me and injects it where I need it, like in here.
How would you like find
All this? What? Remember I did that with a scaffold. Yeah, I think you missed it. You were out, right? I used a scaffold. If you watch the video, I used the Express generator, and it generated all that stuff for me. I didn't make it. All right? Okay, so this is how this all works. Let's test it. We've done all this nice work, but we don't even know if it works anymore. Maybe I broke it. Maybe I broke something. I hope I did. We can fix it, right? And if I refresh, if it works properly, it still works. But look, something's wrong, right? Take a look at this. Contact Me doesn't look like it's working the same way, so I did something wrong. Let's inspect it. And it says that in my console, I'm getting a failed to load resource app.css, huh? Right, app.css is not working. So that's inside of my contact page. So let's see if that's right. So let's see. So here's contact, and I did. If I go to my contact, I have my contact app.css. That looks like it's okay, but it shouldn't say contact, should it? It should say content. That was just a mistype. Let me see if I did the same thing on the other ones. Nope. Just that. Oh, yeah, I did. I did. No, it's this. Look, it's just I made a typo. All right, cool. And if I go back here and if I refresh, then we're good. We have the nice stuff, right? But you see how it links together now, right? It's not so bad. So this is cool. But how do we use things like we've done before? For example, Bootstrap and all that. And where's that going to go? Okay, now this is where we get into trouble. All right. I want you to think about this for a second, right? Bootstrap is going to look for node modules, but that means that on my route, somehow my app needs to know about node modules. That means that node modules need to be on my path somehow. Otherwise, I'm going to go node modules slash blah blah whatever, right? And I don't want to do that, but Express allows me to include node modules on my path if I really want to. By the way, I'm just going to say it right here. This is bad practice, right? I wouldn't use node modules on my path. I would use node modules on my path. If I really want to. By the way, I'm just going to say it right here. This is bad practice, right? I wouldn't use node modules on my path if I really want to. By the way, I'm just going to say it right here. This is bad practice, right? I wouldn't use node modules my path, I would use a CDN, right, in a regular case. I'm not going to do that here because we're learning. So I'm going to go into my app.js, and if I wanted to include another static path, I could. I could say something like, hey, app.use express.static. I want to include that, and inside my path.join, I want to join into my directory name, dir name. I want to join, just like it says in my directory name. Join allows me to join something to my path. That's what it allows me to do, a string of options. I can do it all in here as well, not just public. I can do many of them. But I'm separating them so you can see it easily, okay? I can join node modules, all right? Now, if I was to do this, I'm just going to put it out there. What does this allow me to do? So save it. Immediately, if you go to here, guys, I can hear you. It's really easy to hear you. But if I go here, if I type in node modules, and sorry, you're being recorded. That's what I'm saying, right? That's how loud you are. So if I go to node modules, right? If I just type this, if I enter, it's going to give me, there's no path, right? However, if I want to find stuff in node modules, I can type in whatever I want to find, right? If there's something that matches my types, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, or anything inside node modules, it'll come out. Now that I've done this, right, I don't have to type /node modules /bootstrap. I don't have to do that anymore. I just type /bootstrap, and that's it. If I install Bootstrap. Let's do Bootstrap, and then we'll go. So how does this work? So I'm going to go back to, I'm going to add another little shell. There we go. And I'm going to say yarn add, just like we've normally done before. This is all review, guys. Everything exactly the same, but just working with Express as opposed to Node. Just want to make sure to put this a little higher. So you guys can see this. Yarn add bootstrap, right? I also want jQuery. I also want font awesome, right? Those are things I need. Would you agree? I've done this every time, right? And also popper.js, because otherwise it won't work properly. So yay, Yarn adds those things as dependencies, right? And then I'm also going to add some support. So I'm going to say yarn add @types, node @types, express @types, jQuery, and you can keep going. By the way, there's other types. You can use all these ones, right? HTTP errors, path, cookie parser, Morgan. These are all things you can get typing for. But for this, for us, let's just do this. So --dev. This adds some functionality for me, right? Notice it adds all these different things, right? Which is really, really cool. Which gives me good support for code hinting. Notice also that I got 390 new files because of jQuery and all that other stuff, right? And so yeah, the git ignore will take care of all that. But of course, I'm doing it anyway. So so again, if you notice, if I hover over now, and sometimes what we have to do is you have to close these down to get to show you the support. If I go back into my app.js, and if I hover over require, that's cool. That's all my node stuff. But app.set, because now it knows that Express, it tells you everything, which is awesome. You get really cool code hinting here using stuff. And then, it gives you the ability to understand how this is all used. But furthermore, where it really helps is inside routes. So if I go into my routes and go app-get, it actually gives you all the format for the request, as well as the render, how render works, right? Where what each thing means, the views, the options, a functional callback, a cache, a file name. It tells you everything in here by using that support, which is what I wanted, okay? So these are 390 changes. So I'm going to say I'm going to go back to here. I'm going to add all these things in here. I'm going to push this to GitHub right now. I got another minute, and I'll see if I can. I'll put Bootstrap on one page, just on my index page, okay? And then we'll do the other stuff tomorrow. So in here, I can say added Bootstrap support, which what I just did, right? And we want to add all that and push it to GitHub. Okay, and once that's pushed to GitHub, now I want to change that one view. So I'm going to go into my views. And again, this is going to change tomorrow. I'm going to break this out into two new folders, content and partials. And I'm going to show you how to do partials with EJS, which is, by the way, super, super easy, and you're going to love it. So I'm in my index.ejs page inside here. I want to install Bootstrap. How does this work? Well, I want to do a link. Now remember, it looks at it as EJS. So I don't have any Emmet support. So I can go back and do this for now. And why do I want to keep doing this? I use EJS, so it doesn't give me these funky errors here, right? But I like to use HTML, so it gives me Emmet support. So I can say something like link, right? And now it's slash. Now instead of node modules, I can do the long path of node modules slash and then Bootstrap and then dist and then CSS and bootstrap.min.css is really what I want. That's the explicit path. But because I added node modules to the path by using path.join, I don't have to do that. I can just put Bootstrap. Right? Because node modules, what I've said is, hey, in my app.js, right here on line 20, I've added this new line that says, hey, use a static path for node modules to be included in my directory name. So whether it's public or node modules, I'm good. Let's see if that works. It may not, right? So if I did this, just this change alone with nothing else, just that one part, that one line, right? It should change the way things look for me. So if I go back to my main index like this, you can see now that that is Bootstrap, right? You can see that that is Bootstrap's default font. That means Bootstrap is working without using node modules, right? Without using node modules in my template, right? That works now. Yeah.
The directory name is just
Sorry? It's actually an enumeration that's part of Node.js. So dir name means something. There's other ones. If you look at the file system module for Node.js, it gives you a bunch of those.
It's like a recursive loop for the directory.
Yeah. It adds that to the dir name, the directory name, the current directory name, whatever you're looking at, add in node module. So you don't have to ever search for node modules. It's just part of the path. And if it doesn't find it in one place, it'll look for it in the other place. That's what it does. All right, so that's Bootstrap. Let's do the other ones really quickly because we also had font awesome. So it's link as an example. And we'll go slash node modules for now. We'll take it out. And then font awesome, and then CSS, and then font awesome.min.css. So there it is. And we can just eliminate this part because we know node modules is now part of the path, right? And on the bottom where we enable Bootstrap, right, we can use JavaScript. We can say script. Oh, I'll do that one. Script. I want to use the source. And I want to say is, again, node modules. I need jQuery. So I'm going to go to jQuery first. And I'm going to go to dist, jQuery.min.js. And I'm going to take away the node modules part because I know I don't need that anymore. Right? And the same thing goes with Bootstrap, right? I can say jQuery. I can go, actually, I probably should have not done this. But anyways, the node modules, Bootstrap, and then dist, and then JS, and then bootstrap.min.js, and then just get rid of node modules. And I can actually have done that differently in terms of like a find and replace if everything was crazy. I need these two things. And then if I wanted my own custom one, this is interesting. I can put my own custom script inside my scripts folder. Let's make a new file called scripts. So app.js, where I install my typical way of doing things. Right? Arg. Right? Where I have my start function. All right. Beat the clock. Beat the clock. Let's see. I'm really going crazy here. App started and some kind of CSS where my color is blue and my font size is 30 pixels. You can do crazy stuff now because it's all the same stuff we've done before. Nothing different here. We're just using Express to do everything, right? And we're going to do a window.add event listener on load start. It's all the same stuff we've done before, right? This is the same thing. So this is saved, right? And what we're going to do here is we're going to put that script in here, but this time, did I make a mistake?
No, it doesn't matter if there's a bundle or Bootstrap. Okay.
Instead of Bootstrap, we're going to go into scripts, right? So we can say /scripts, but it's not scripts. It's slash public, right? So here's public scripts. Look, it gives me the thing, right? App.js, and just get rid of public. It does both because public is also part of the path. That's why this works. And of course, we don't want this here. We want this here because our own custom CSS should be underneath the Bootstrap stuff. Okay, and that gives us this. And if we did everything correctly in our index.html equivalent, then if I refresh, you should see app started. Because everything is linked together. And if you actually look at the sources, you can see that my index.html, so if I look at my view source, you can see my index.html looks exactly like this, Bootstrap, content, and so on. And it gets injected. All the stuff gets injected in here. It doesn't look like there's code. It looks like it's actually injected, like I actually wrote it this way, because it gets created. Okay, questions? Tons of stuff, again, today. And that's why I told you when we talked about this at the beginning, Riaz, this is something that is a whole semester's worth of work that we can do in 2 weeks. Right? Tomorrow we're going to do more about this, more Express Generator stuff, and we'll format this a little differently so we can have our 3-page site. Thank you so much, guys, for watching and being in class, and I'll see you tomorrow.